So I learned something amazing. Like just before coming on here, I learned something amazing. Okay. Beto O'Rourke, the presidential candidate, used to be a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow hacking group in the 90s.
Wow.
Awesome.
I know.
Sold.
3 developers, 1 mission. Build a business to nurture personal fulfillment. It's not stupid. It's FounderQuest.
Now you have to go look for his byline in like the frack.
I know, right? Like I used to read their reports from DEF CON and all the conferences and stuff. And used to be like, man, these guys are so cool. They're so much more like mature than I am. I don't know how they got all the money to go to Las Vegas and do things when, I'm 17 and have no job.
That's kind of how you feel about the guy who's running for president now, probably.
Yeah, probably.
So I guess not much has changed.
Oh, speaking of yaks and blockers and all this stuff, we finally have our podcast artwork, as you saw. So we can now actually, this is episode number 6 of FounderQuest.
Is it?
And yeah, nobody's heard it but me, really.
I kind of like it like this. There's no pressure.
Yeah. Should I just keep saving them to Dropbox and that's it?
I mean, that's cool with me.
That's fine.
Yeah.
They can release them after we're like dead and famous.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, I didn't want to set up the website because I don't know what colors artwork has in it. And you have to have, you want to have them matched colors and stuff. So
yeah, but now we can get the first one out.
Yeah. Now we can start rolling them out.
See what people think of them.
In Slack, we've been talking like all morning yesterday about all these blockers we have, right? Because, when you're doing development on any sort of bigger project, like you have this idea of like the real work you want to get to, like the feature work. And then you have the things that are preventing you from doing the real work. Sometimes we call that, yak shaving, because in order to, you want a sweater, but you need yarn to make the sweater, then you need wool to make the yarn, and you eventually end up shaving a yak. I think that's where that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Is this a false distinction, you guys? You think there is a such thing as the real work?
You mean like, does the real work exist, or is it just all yak
does the real
shaving?
Work exist?
I think you could make a case that it is yak shaving to an extent, like anything you would do. Would be blocking something else, at least.
The reason I asked this is I had this bit of an epiphany when I was struggling through some random Webpack stuff where I was like, man, what if this is all there really is? Like, what if this is it, guys?
Kind of like an existential crisis.
Yeah,
like,
kind of. Yeah, kind of. And it was fine. Like I was having a good time, just doing my Webpack updates and everything. But this idea that we have some sort of mythical real work to do.
Well, web development has become, it feels like to me, it's become a lot more complex over the years. Like, I don't know, that could be an illusion too. like computers have always been hard, but it feels like the amount of things that you have to do just to do web development in the first place has increased. I don't know how you guys feel, but that's how it feels to me.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I mean, it's not as simple as just throwing some HTML up on the webs, and having people see it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think whenever you're building on anything, right, you have to deal with all the things you're building on top of.
Kind of like when we used to write HTML and then we had to write some PHP in our HTML.
So the three of us kind of, I don't know, came of age, but we really enjoyed the rise of Rails. And I wonder if maybe that was some sort of golden moment in which things became simple enough where you could build an entire website, state-of-the-art website with the skills of sort of one person, right? I remember working on Rails projects and feeling like, man, I've got this Rails stuff down. It's like I can go over here, write my Ruby. I've just got to make a few little views in HTML. I got some CSS done. I am a ninja at this stuff. But now it feels, different. It's like, okay, I can work on a feature in Ruby for a while, and then I'm going to have to go and redo my JavaScript tooling to make JavaScript compile because, something happened. And there's all this context switching that maybe there didn't used to be.
Yeah. And the pace of change, again, especially I think with JavaScript tooling is sped up so much and everything's changing so rapidly that I think we have to go back and reevaluate our tooling and stuff more often. Yeah,
you're working on something right now, aren't you, Josh? That you're redoing some of our code on our client library for JavaScript.
Yeah, I'm working on our Honey Badger honey.js or honeybadger.js library for a big 1.0 release. Finally, we've been like pre 1.0 all this time, but
we're still not up to 1.0 yet.
No, I'm a big fan of semantic versioning, and you don't really have to do it if you're not to 1.0 yet. So, that's a good way around it. But
yeah, I think the JavaScript world has definitely made us deal with acceleration and the dependency management, world, I guess. Like, with Rails, what I really appreciate is that they've taken kind of a measured approach. Like, it has definitely changed over the years, but the change comes pretty slowly, like relatively speaking. Every couple of years there's a major version and you have to deal with that, right? But it seems like JavaScript libraries, like every couple of months there's a major version, or like one of the 5 things that you're working with has a major version. So there's like always a major version change happening and you got to like rebuild everything.
Yeah. The thing I'm working on now is I've been trying to, like, I've done a bunch of feature work on the library, but it always seems to come back to when I have to work on our build tooling or our CI, continuous integration, is where I seem to spend the majority of my time, especially since I don't develop this package like all the time. So I'll let it sit for a while and then come back to it and do a bunch of work on it. So usually by the time I get back to it, things have kind of moved on in a lot of ways, and there tends to be things that I need to kind of troubleshoot to bring up to modern standards again.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same thing. About like maybe a year ago, I converted all of our CoffeeScript to ES6, and I'm really glad I did it. And as part of that, we have Webpack now in our sort of build system. And we have, in addition to Webpack, we have a lot of, Webpack, we have a lot of dependencies. And so recently we use this thing called Dependabot to see when any of our dependencies are out of date. They have, maybe security problems with them, stuff like that. It opens a PR in GitHub, and I guess it was Ben turned this on for JavaScript. And so suddenly we have a ton of dependencies that are out of date. And I've been sort of working through those. Like, it's a little bit rough. One thing that I find is really different between the sort of JavaScript dependencies and the Ruby dependencies is that with the Ruby dependencies, it seems like, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't really done a ton of them, but it seems like, okay, it's a new version of the gem, you update, maybe you have to change your code a little bit, but that's it. But one thing I'm finding with these JavaScript dependencies is that the Dependabot way of upgrading each one individually and then opening a new PR for each upgrade is kind of difficult, because you have to upgrade like all these things at once for them to work together, or else you're just screwed because they're all so tightly interconnected.
I haven't dealt much with the JavaScript dependencies, so I can't say like the differences between them and the Ruby side. But yeah, definitely, I agree that the Ruby dependencies are usually pretty independent of each other, right? You can upgrade this gem and not that gem, and it's a stepwise process.
Yeah, and there's a lot fewer of them typically.
I wonder how big our node modules directory is.
I have, back in the dark days where like Rails 3 or something, when you would have to update gems, like I remember a number of times where it was like, okay, just bundle update, all right, update everything at once, and it was like a mess, right? So maybe that's the same point we're at with JavaScript right now, where to get a good update, you have to update everything at the same time, and that's just a mess.
Yeah, and I think it also has a lot to do with like how you lock your dependencies, and like I don't know what we're doing on that end as well for JavaScript too. But that's also a Ruby thing. Like,
and one thing I'm finding with JavaScript dependency upgrades is that, well, we sort of straddle two worlds, right, with Honeybadger, with our front end, because we have, on one hand, all this modern tooling. We have a lot of JavaScript, but when we started building this, this was before React. This was before, pretty much all the more modern ways of doing things with JavaScript. And so most of our code uses a sort of older paradigm using, jQuery, updating the DOM and stuff. And it works fine. Like, we've got it organized in a way that I'm very happy with. One thing I'm finding is that because we use dependencies that are from the sort of older time, we're actually having some of them becoming sort of abandonware. Mm-hmm. And this is a bigger problem for us right now, because like I recently needed to upgrade jQuery to the latest major version. But we use jQuery PJAX, which is a plugin, to give us sort of this single page like TurboLinks style behavior on our front end. And it just doesn't work with the new jQuery because it's abandoned. pretty much. So now, in order to upgrade jQuery, we have to migrate to Turbolinks or some other, more modern way of doing things. So it's this back-asswards way of working that's just incredibly frustrating at times because you just want to freaking build features and ship them. But
well, I remember back when PJAX was like the hotness. That was well before Turbolinks, and I think it was GitHub that initially initially like kind of started that whole way of doing, making kind of normal traditional web apps faster with the PJAX approach. And then that's basically what got picked up and rolled into Turbolinks.
Maybe we should explain what this is. With PJAX and Turbolinks, instead of having a single page application where you have a bunch of JavaScript that creates an application in the browser, what you do is everything is still rendered server side, just like a traditional web application, but there's a little bit of JavaScript that goes in, and when you click on a link, instead of fetching a whole new page, it intercepts that and sends an AJAX request to your backend. And the backend renders the new page, sends it to the front end, and JavaScript is used to update and refresh the page. And that may sound like a sort of not much of a change, but it actually results in significantly improved performance times because you don't have to reparse all the JavaScript. You don't have to reparse all the CSS that you're using. So it's actually a really great compromise.
Yeah, I recently threw Turbolinks onto my blog. It was already fast because it's basically just like HTML pages, but it created a noticeable improvement in the page load times and all that. So that was kind of a cool little thing. It's like 3 lines of code. You just, throw it into the page and it's done. So my blog is now a single page app.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems to be kind of the thing to do these days. I know a lot of people who are kind of converting their blogs to React and that sort of stuff. So I figured I'd have to, give it a try.
I published my personal blog on a Xerox machine. So.
Oh, cool. You were saying kind of how some dependencies tend to become abandonware or become outdated. And that's something that I've also been running into with this Honey Badger JS, like the build system work, because we use a build system called Grunt, which is, it's a build system. It lets you create tasks that automate things that you're doing when you're building the production JavaScript package. It's kind of similar to Rake in Ruby or Make even. But it has a bunch of packages or plugins that have been developed for it. And I've been running into the same thing where because Grunt is not the new hot build system anymore, there's a bunch of other ones, Gulp, and I'm sure 5 others that are even more popular than that now. I keep running into packages that I want to use, but the last commit on them was 2016, or I'm running across GitHub issues when I'm trying to figure out how, why something's not working. And I check the date and it's 2013.
Oh,
so
those are the worst.
Yeah. So it's do I use this stuff? Because some of it actually still works, but it's, it's unsupported, obviously. But the only other alternative is set up a new build system and redo everything. And, that in itself is a massive yak to shave. So I'm making yak trade-offs, which yak do I want to shave? Which one is, which one's bigger?
So they always say open source isn't free. And I guess this is one of the costs of open source.
Yeah, I guess the alternative being that you're stuck with whatever your vendor tries to put on you, right? And, if things are outdated, they're well, tough, buy the new version.
Yeah, that's true.
But I guess a lot of web developers, don't remember the bad old days of building for a platform like Windows, right? Where you only have one choice, and that's whatever the vendor decides to give you. Now we have all this choice and all these ways to be able to implement what we want. And so I guess that's the cost, like Star was saying, that's the cost of open source.
These are these problems we have are problems that more established products have. We didn't have these problems when we were starting out because we didn't have as much code. We didn't have as much infrastructure or anything like that. Because we had just built it all, it was all relatively new. So I don't know. I think we should maybe just, ditch this one, start something new.
That sounds like it's a good solution.
Well, one thing that's nice about Dependabot, the thing I've really enjoyed about that is that it keeps you aware of those dependency changes, so you don't get so behind. Right? Yeah. I think the real pain of abandonware is when you rely on something that's, that hasn't been updated in 3 years. But, if you notice that, things are moving on and you're only behind like 3 months, well, that's not quite as painful to update.
That's true.
And that's what I really like about Dependabot. It's like, oh yeah, you should. Oh, I guess you have to combine that with the discipline to actually take some time to go and manage those updates, right? Mm-hmm. Like even if it's a simple Ruby gem update, right? You have to like take a look at the commits and maybe the change log and see what's changed. And will this break my app if I add this dependency? And that takes time, right? So I guess you just have to be disciplined about it to really save yourself the pain down the road.
I think at this point it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think we could probably come close to keeping a junior hire busy, simply upgrading dependencies and doing tests to make sure that, everything worked and all that.
Yeah. Across like all our repos and everything.
Yeah. Across all the repos. I bet we could keep somebody busy.
I really like, I like what you said, Ben. A lot of this, like this, what we're calling Yak Shaving here is really managing technical debt and not upgrading or, like pushing things off, like upgrading creates more debt down the road. And so when we go and we actually need to get some work done on something and we realize, oh, well, that we haven't touched this place or, these dependencies in like a year or two, we have to, pay some interest before we can actually get to work. And so I think like Yak Shaving is kind of, you create more yaks with the more technical debt you have. Or you could also call it like interest on your debt.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do all this stuff, like we have to, but it's kind of like, you're on a treadmill almost, you're running just to stand still.
Yeah. Well, some of these automated tools like Dependabot are, I think, really going to help, and they already are helping us with that. But as we integrate them more into our development flow, I think that I would expect them to help this problem a little bit, because we're not going to get this far behind, hopefully. And as long as we are a little bit more disciplined and these tools kind of help us, I think it'll hopefully create less work in the future and less technical debt to deal with.
On your note of let's just build something new, I think that is part of the argument behind microservices, right? It's like if you have a new feature you want to build, like, that blog post you just wrote about the autocomplete, right? And you implemented that completely outside of our main app. So you could call that a microservice if you want. But the dependencies there are much smaller, right? The scope of the work is much smaller. You're just focused on that one feature. And so you don't have to worry about, this dependency conflicting with that dependency and blah, 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 blah. And so, I think one of the arguments that people have for going down the microservice route is, we have all these small services that are all very self-contained, and, upgrading the dependencies on them is much easier piece by piece. But then, of course, you have to, do that on 20 different apps rather than just one. Right?
That's interesting. It's like you're right, because you'd be doing more dependency upgrades, but there might be fewer dependencies per upgrade, so there's less chance of them clashing. Yeah, so we talked briefly about turbo links and stuff, and one thing, this isn't really related to the subject, but it kind of is, because I'm hoping that this new thing, this new technology will completely eliminate the need for me to ever have to set up Webpack again. And that is, I'm talking about Phoenix Live View. In case people don't know, Phoenix Live View is essentially going to be like turbo links on steroids. The thing with turbo links is that when you request a new page, what happens is that it goes and it fetches the entire new page, and then it puts it in the DOM and everything. What Phoenix Live View does is, because Phoenix is based in Elixir, and Elixir is very, very good at doing high concurrency things. What happens with Phoenix Live View, I think, is that you can actually go and fetch a little component, a part of the page. You can have the server render that and then return it. You can have several of these requests going on at the same time. So essentially you have a highly interactive sort of front end type app, but it's being entirely rendered server side. So there's no need for really any sort of custom JavaScript. I don't know. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think the way it struck me when I first saw it was, as a Rails developer, is kind of how you can do like JavaScript partials in Rails, like where you'd make like a partial, like an AJAX request to the server, and then you can render out like some sort of JavaScript code that then gets passed back to the server and then executed on the client side. But with Phoenix, it's so fast that you can actually do that almost in real time, basically. So you can build applications that you couldn't build with, even though Rails can kind of do that, you can't build a real-time application just because it's not fast enough. And with Phoenix Live View, at least the claim is that it's actually like, because of the way Phoenix and Elixir and Erlang work with their process model, it is fast enough basically to serve a bunch of different clients like that in real time, to the point almost where you could actually have a chat client or even do real-time animation that's server rendering your HTML, which is that was a example that was crazy to me.
Yeah, because Phoenix has excellent support for WebSockets and all that. But I think it's a little bit different from JavaScript partials.
Yeah.
Because I really hope it's different because JavaScript partials kind of suck.
Mm-hmm.
I think with LiveView, you're not sending back JavaScript that manipulates DOM and stuff like that. I think what's happening is you're rendering a template, you return some HTML, and then the LiveView JavaScript library goes in and does something very similar to React, in that it does this own sort of shadow DOM thing where it looks at the snippet of code trying to be inserted in the DOM, and then it only changes the elements sort of as necessary in place. Mm-hmm. So you don't get that sort of full refresh sort of penalty.
I think that's right. And the thing that really makes it possible is the WebSocket support, because it does everything over a WebSocket, which is why it's one reason why you can take advantage of more real-time capabilities, because it's not making as many round trips to the server.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to work for things like necessarily mobile. It's not going to work for things where you have to have offline access. But, I'm willing to never write a mobile app if it means that I can write things in pure Elixir and have these beautiful, interactive, fast applications.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the most Railsy thing I've seen that is purely Phoenix and Elixir, personally. It's really cool. I could see Rails doing this if Ruby if Ruby was capable of it. But because Elixir has those capabilities, it's one of the few things that I look at it and it's wow, that's Ruby really can't handle. It could not. I don't see it ever being able to handle that sort of thing. And it's a totally unique way to build a web application.
And I have to say, it's just, even if this thing doesn't pan out, it gives me hope, because, without hope, all I see is endless JavaScript dependencies, endless node module directories just stretching out before me. And it's bleak, guys. It's bleak. I don't like it. I don't want this future.
Yeah, it is kind of heartening that people are still trying to build frameworks that simplify things in that regard. And I think you talked about how Rails back in, I don't know what, 2010 or something was the golden age of web development, because it was basically just simple and you could kind of understand the full stack. For me, what I loved about Rails was that it basically took all the stuff that I was already doing and it organized it. It wasn't really doing anything new, but it was still, my server-side code and my HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but it was organized in a way that made me a lot more efficient. So I'm hoping, that people still kind of build in that way in the future. I guess with a lot of this front end stuff, it can kind of get pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah, as somebody who likes to work in small teams, work by myself and build products, I really love solutions like that, where it's not just so much of the process and sort of technology that we have now is about sort of being able to manage complexity. And that's fine, but you still have to manage it. I'd rather it just not be there.
A lot of these technologies really are built for, they're built for much larger teams and larger problems larger things basically than what we're even doing. The scale of some of these applications that people are using, some of the more complex, JavaScript frameworks or whatever I don't see us really attempting to tackle as a 3-person team. So,
I don't think we could. We couldn't build Facebook. That's ridiculous.
So I'm wondering, are we getting to the point where the tooling is diverged, where some of the tooling is built for, managing a massive level of complexity with a massive number of people working on it at the same time? Does a team like ours really need to use the same tools that, Facebook needs to use, for instance?
That's an excellent question. So talking about blockers and Yak Shaving, I think, guys, I'm about ready to give the Mac desktop another shot.
You're thrown in the towel, huh?
I don't know if I've thrown in the towel. I love my Linux box for running Docker, for doing development on, but pretty much everything that's not Vim and a terminal, it's really starting to get on my nerves. And it's not that you can't set it up to be nice, but it's like we talked about with all these dependencies and managing that. You set it up to be nice once, and then over time, it just slowly devolves and becomes less and less, and things just gradually stop working. Then you have to go in and figure out, what changed about some new version of a thing to make this not work? And, that's fine if that's my job, but I don't want to have to do that with Spotify. I don't want to do that to be able to frickin' put emojis in my tweets.
Yeah.
That's just I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I was when I was using Linux on desktop. After several years, I was like, you know what? When OS 10 came out, and I saw the beauty that was the Mac UI on top of the Unix shell, I thought that was just awesome. I knew that was where I wanted to be, and I decided, like, I had used Linux desktop up to that point, and I had the same experiences. Like, you always got to worry about things that are breaking. And at some point, I just decided, you know what? I want to do work with my computer rather than being working on my computer.
Yeah. So I've got a suggestion just for all of us. Let's just destroy our computers and we'll buy an ice cream truck and we'll go and sell ice cream to the little children. And we'll get to see the smiles on their beautiful faces as they, eat their treats. It's so much nicer, so much nicer.
The way you describe that is beautiful.
I know.
I'm in. Yeah, I'm in.
All right. I think we have enough content. So should we say goodbye?
FounderQuest is a weekly podcast by the founders of Honey Badger. Zero instrumentation, 360-degree coverage of errors, outages, and service degradations for your web apps. If you have a web app, you need it. Available at honeybadger.io. Want more from the founders? Go to FounderQuestPodcast.com. That's one word. You can access our huge back catalog or sign up for our newsletter to get exclusive VIP content. FounderQuest is available on iTunes, Spotify, and other purveyors of fine podcasts. We'll see you next week.